Hello, I'm John Barry, the president of the American Australian Association, and I'm so excited that we have an outstanding panel for you tonight. The AAA has awarded over 900 scholarships to graduates, veterans, and artists worth nearly $13 million to date. Our grant round from Australia to the United States is open now until March. So if you're thinking of studying in the United States, all of our watchers in Australia, please spread the word and help people know about our program, and you can learn more how to apply on our website. Now, I am very honored to introduce our moderator for tonight, and that is Jacob Greber, the US Correspondent for the Australian Financial Review. He covers politics, economics, and business from Washington, D.C. He's had a very distinguished career at Fairfax Media for over a decade. Previously, he was the banking and economic reporter for Bloomberg, Bloomberg News, Swiss Info, and Swiss Radio International. Jacob, we're so happy to have you tonight. Over to you to introduce the rest of our great panel.
Ambassador Barry, thanks very much for the kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here. I'm feeling a little bit fraudulent because I'm actually coming to you from Canberra at the moment. I'm not in DC, and this is all about what's happening in DC. But through the magic of Zoom, no one will ever know. Oh, I just told them. Let me introduce our two great guests. I'm really looking forward to talking to both of you. Amy Dacey is the Executive Director of the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics at American University in Washington. She's been an active player in national policy making for more than 2 decades. She's advised no lesser figures than Barack Obama and Joe Biden's new climate change czar, John Kerry. She worked for then Senator Kerry on his presidential campaign way back in 2004, and she's also been Chief Executive Officer of the Democratic National Committee. In short, I don't think we could have a better person to help us understand the new Biden administration. Also with us, equally qualified and insightful, is Alex Tureman. He's the founding partner at Bondi Partners, which he established amid the furnace of COVID kicking off last year with his former boss, Ambassador Joe Hockey, for whom he served as a senior policy advisor. From what I can tell, basically a Drago man for Mr. Hockey to help him understand America's political and corporate landscape. So he's fresh from the battlefield as well the last few months, having volunteered for the 2020 Biden for President campaign, which is one of the many campaigns he's been on. So let's get right into it. And I thought we'd start with you, Amy, with that view from Washington as this new administration gets to grips with what I think is obvious to even the most casual observer is a formidable set of challenges.
Yes, well, thank you so much for everybody for joining us tonight. I want to thank certainly Ambassador Barry, the Australian American Association, and Alex and Jacob. So much to discuss. So just to put some context about what's happening in DC, as I am here in DC today, this is about Build Back Better. So the question is, how do we rebuild and build forward at the same time, which is really the true challenge right now for the Biden administration, both domestically and internationally. There's some formidable things happening. 75% of Americans are pessimistic about the direction of the country. The US alone has seen 400,000 deaths with the COVID global pandemic. 1/3 of Americans have lost their job or someone in their household has, and 16 billion in damages with climate-related disasters in the last couple of years. These are all the things that, you get the job and now you have to do it. I think the policy priorities of the first year are certainly to figure out how to do the vaccine distribution, how to get us out of this global pandemic, and of course the financial question of how are we getting people back to work, how are we rebuilding the financial situation in the United States, and then of course there's those questions about how are we rebuilding our credibility in the world as well. So those are kind of the issues that will be at the forefront of people's minds as they're building this new administration. For context, this happens and is executed in different ways. First and foremost, executive orders, which we've seen certainly, by the way, this is President Biden's first full week in office. It seems like he's been there for a while now, but it's It's only his first full week in office, and he's been doing certainly executive orders. We've seen with the stimulus package that the 1.9 trillion he's trying to get, through both chambers in Congress. Legislation will be a big piece of that, and then certainly foreign policy, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And the question is, do you use unity to lead us through this? That was certainly a mainstay in President Biden's and Vice President Harris's campaign trail. But the question now is, with a very slim margin in the Senate and with House control with the Democrats, how is Congress going to work with the administration, moving forward? I think we've seen some clear, early signals of how that's going to work. We've seen staffing, especially in some of the highest levels. Mention one of my previous people that I worked for, bringing Secretary Kerry into a new role. You've seen with, with Secretary Blinken now, you've seen with Janet Yellen, you've seen with Ron Klain. There's bringing in a lot of established institutional people who have either worked in administrations before or had a key role in the Obama administration. Again, I say the executive orders, 30 in the first 3 days. And to put that in context, Trump did 35 in the first year. So I think, that building and rebuilding is coming a lot through sending a signal, especially then the issues based for that. And then also there's meetings and prioritization. You've also seen with Jen Psaki at the helm and communications every day talking about what their priorities are. And then certainly impeachment is surrounding all of this. So I certainly have talked about a lot of these issues to people and with you, Alex, as well. But that just kind of sets the stage of all the things that are facing us as we move forward.
Yeah, Amy, first of all, thank you to the AAA and Ambassador Barry. You guys do such a fantastic job strengthening the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Australia. So thanks for all you do. And Amy, you're right. You hit on so many great points. I think if it wasn't already clear before January 6th, after the attack on the Capitol, it is clear that the challenges that the Biden administration faces, a majority of them are on the domestic front. Whether you look at it through the prism of COVID and the impacts that we've seen on the public health system, whereas Amy referenced 425,000 Americans have now lost their lives. Or you look at it through the economic impacts, where now the administration comes into office now with 10 million fewer jobs than we had at the same point last year. A majority of those jobs that were lost were from people that were making $40,000 or less. Or climate change, or racial injustice, or a lack of faith in our democratic institutions. This is a really full dance card for the Biden administration, and I think it's going to be really important for the administration to prioritize which issues come first. But beyond our borders, what the administration has pushed, whether it's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan or Secretary of State Tony Blinken, he gave his first press conference officially as Secretary of State today, or Lloyd Austin, or Janet Yellen, or Linda Thomas Greenfield, all of these officials have really emphasized that there needs to be a foreign policy for the middle class. So what does that mean? It's trade agreements that are viewed and crafted with the American worker in mind. And also, they've stressed that in order to be strong abroad, we've really got to be strong at home. And that's not only the strength of our economy and the strength of our public health system, but it also includes the strength of our democratic institutions. So there's a lot of work to be done there. On top of that, I think that the administration is going to prioritize rebuilding our alliance system. That's going to be extremely important. And under the America First platform, it really was knocked down a few rungs as a priority the past few years. But don't get me wrong. I think the elephant in the room that the Biden administration is planning to tackle through some very holistic policy is the China issue. And crafting policy that can curb an increasingly aggressive China is going to be extremely important. We saw it over the past week and a half during those aforementioned secretaries and officials confirmation hearings. But what they didn't do is they did not antagonize the Trump administration's sentiments towards China. Tony Blinken even said at the outset that President Trump did have his finger on the pulse of a serious issue. And he disagreed, however, with the tactics that were deployed. So I really don't think this administration is going to have diplomacy by tweet. I think they're going to marshal all the resources of the U.S. government and reinvigorate our global alliance system so that we can leverage those tools to better combat a bunch of different issues. But one of which is probably our most significant geostrategic and commercial competitor that we've ever faced as a country in China. Finally, I just want to say that having had the pleasure of working in a public capacity over the past 3.5 years with Australians, I am bullish on the U.S.-Australian relationship. I think it's more vibrant and frankly more integrated than it's ever been. If you look at it on the commercial front, with the U.S. being the #1 source of foreign direct investment into Australia, or on the defense front, where Australia has military personnel in 32 U.S. states, it's strong and only getting stronger. So thank you to the AAA. Amy, Jacob, looking forward to a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Alex, Amy, thanks very much. I think you've both outlined really well the extraordinary sort of shift in tone and tenor that we've seen. And I can't believe it hasn't even been a full week. As you said, Amy, it feels like it's been about a month or two already. And that just talks to the sort of speed at which things are being reversed, overhauled, and pushed in a new direction in so many areas. And I think we'll get into some of them, but perhaps let's start with China, because I know that's the one that's very, very close front of mind in Australia for a lot of people. There's a lot of anxiety about the shift in administration here. There's a sense that while Trump might have been erratic, he was certainly behind us when it came to the issues that Australia has with China. Perhaps you could talk, Amy, about whether Australians should be worried about this change of administration, because we do feel like we're somewhat sort of way out on the cliff edge sometimes in terms of that relationship. And it's at times it's a lot easier for you guys to push back against China. For us, there are real costs.
Yeah, I think what you saw throughout the campaign and these first, the transition, which did highlight some of the priorities as well, both domestically and internationally. The president has repeatedly made clear that the Asia Pacific region is one of tremendous importance and opportunity. And I think that it's one where our interests and values face increasing challenges. But I do think that one of the clear things that we're talking about, and Alex really touched on this, is it's become more complicated and intense during the presidency of Donald Trump since Mr. Biden has, President Biden had left as vice president several years ago. But the challenges that are facing us is certainly that increasing insert of China. And I think what Alex was mentioning is one of the most important things, is that while the challenges are still there, it is the tactics or how those conversations are going to happen or how they're going to deal with it. I think one of the first and foremost, we've seen that by this new administration appointing, as they've called it, an Asian czar to look, to work across the entire administration to see China and how it influences a lot of issues and areas. That's a big thing that sends a major signal. But I also think that you're going to see, when it comes to issues with China, that this is not going to be a unilateral that you saw time and again with the Trump administration going in, tweeting something out, making a statement without talking to allies and looking at it as a regional area, as well. And I do think that the Indochina area and the allies and the influence that's around there, you'll see the administration, and certainly Secretary Blinken as well, having conversations, making decisions that are not just one-sided. I think, of course, they're looking, we laid out a lot of things that are not only economic, but defense-wise, that are challenges with China. So those are going to be first and foremost, for U.S. relations. But I think the big thing is the tactics that are going to be used, but then also how the administration is going to go and use its allies to try and make progress within the region and globally.
I was going to say, so, personnel is policy, right? And so what we've seen from I was encouraged by yesterday's conversation between newly minted Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, as well as Linda Reynolds from WA, the defense minister from Australia. They touched on a lot of strong topics, including, I have to mention, the 100 years of mateship. But when you look at the National Security Council, as Amy referenced, whether it's Kurt Campbell as Indo-Pacific coordinator, or you look at Eli Ratner as a senior advisor to Secretary Austin at DOD, or you look at Jake Sullivan, who even prior to assuming his role as National Security Advisor, highlighted the issues around Australian wine tariffs that they were facing. So, you know, I somewhat laughed off Xi's comments at the World Economic Forum around, you know, not kowtowing to bullies, because in fact, when it comes to places like Hong Kong or Taiwan or Singapore or other areas in the Indo-Pacific, that's exactly what China has done. And I think the administration is going to put a strong emphasis on human rights as well. And so we're going to see that in relation to the Uyghur issue in Northwest China. But on top of that, from an alliance standpoint, I think that Australia should be encouraged because the US is going to fully commit to the Quad. And there have been discussions around potentially bringing in like-minded partners into the Quad. So I think Australia should feel confident that the US will be shoulder to shoulder with them at the negotiating table, rather than the America First policies, which was pretty much every man for himself.
Yeah.
Can I just challenge you a little bit on that idea, Alex? There is a view that perhaps with the Trump administration, Australia, because it was one of the only ones that had great access to the White House, to all the people that mattered, and that was partly because of some pretty tough battles over things like steel tariffs, and Australia benefited greatly from that close relationship. But by the same token, is there a sense perhaps that we were too close to that style of America First, that Trumpism, and that there now might be some payback? Maybe we aren't the first people who get the call. Maybe we're the 12th or the 20th people who get the call. And I do note that Biden is yet, I think to my knowledge, as we sit here, he still hasn't spoken with Morrison. That might have changed in the last hour or so. I suspect it must be soon, but it's notable. He's down the list.
Well, he did speak to him during the transition, you'd remember, Jacob. So a few days out, he spoke to a handful of Pacific allies, and one of which was Prime Minister Morrison. I don't think there is a major concern that Australia was too close to the Trump administration. The Biden administration is mature enough and pragmatic enough to realize that every country had to do what it had to do in order to ensure that they weren't on the wrong end of a tweet. Because waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a tweet and finding out that you have steel tariffs or aluminum tariffs or any sort of travel ban or something like that, that's not going to happen under this administration. So I think that Australia should feel like they're in a very strong place. And like I said at the outset, the relationship is so integrated at this point that it's encouraging to see whether it's Linda Thomas Greenfield or Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken or Lloyd Austin, who had a phone call with his counterpart in Canberra yesterday. They are reaching out, and this will happen over time. There's a lot of alliances to clean up at the moment. So it doesn't mean necessarily that Australia is too far down the road.
Amy, did you have any thoughts on that issue?
Just to add, I mean, the American people voted for, experience and stability in a lot of ways. And I think that what you've seen is what you're getting with President Biden is also a long history of somebody who's serving, in the Senate, on the Foreign Relations Committee. You see some of the members that he's bringing in that have had relationships over the years in this region and certainly, with different leaders. I think they're inclusive, and I do think that they are going to, do what's best for the United States and its allies, but I think it's going to be an administration who brings people to the table first. And so I think, that remains to be seen what order, but I think, everybody is going to see an outreach. because that's the style of the people that are coming in. And also, I think this administration saw the damage that was done, on the global front and the reputation of the United States. And so it understands it's got to reach its hand out to a lot of these countries to try and talk through how we're going to go through, together on a lot of these issues. And I think the other thing it recognizes that some of the biggest challenges in the United States are ones that it doesn't stop, certainly at our border. There's things that we're going to have to talk to all countries about, whether it comes to the global pandemic or, our economy and figuring out ways to get back on track. There's going to be, it's going to be something that they're going to have to rely on other people, both internally, from the opposite party, and different branches of government, but internationally as well.
And Amy, I think one of the big issues as well, we talked about China, but we've also seen in the last few hours today in Washington, big emphasis on climate change, the big shifts that are underway. We've already seen the renewal with the Paris Accord last week. We've seen Biden unveil a manufacturing policy that's very heavy on things like pushing for electronic motor vehicles instead of gas. So all of that's rumbling. I think it's fair to say that whole sector, that whole climate change policy shift that business is driving towards has had a massive shot in the arm with the arrival of this new administration. Does that put Australia, which has obviously some serious legacy in terms of its own coal export industry, gas, and other things, does that put us in a very difficult position? And I ask you this because you've worked with John Kerry, and John Kerry is going to have an incredibly powerful role to play here. And my sense is he's going to come at us pretty hard on some of these issues.
Well, I think there was a recognition, and if some of you watched, the press conference today, that certainly had Gina McCarthy and Secretary Kerry both at the table talking through some of these priorities. Certainly some of these, they signed some executive orders today talking about the importance of making it a priority. I think one thing, that's very important is to talk about the structure. Yes, President Biden did bring in John Kerry in a very important role because he wants to make sure that climate change action with the environment is not only segregated to one part of his administration, but certainly is across all departments and agencies. This is going to be something that needs to be a priority, not only for state, but for commerce, but for HUD, and I think that that's the thing that he's signaling. I also think that it's a position that certainly is at the table with the rest of the cabinet. It certainly has got some national security, access as well, but it's also not going to be able to make unilateral decisions in the sense that, Secretary Kerry is going to have to work with a lot of others in the administration to find consensus within the administration on these issues. I also think today it was very important. They talked about the aspirational and, some of the new job making, opportunities in the United States today around newer energy, but whether it's wind or other policies or generating jobs. But in addition, it said that it's not going to shut down any one industry. This is something that they're going to have to figure out over time and do it smart so that it's done in a way that moves us forward, but at the same time doesn't tear down and apart certain industries. And I do think that I think they're going to be looking at how that affects globally, and that different countries in different areas of the world certainly have different priorities with this. But it is, there's no doubt that this is a huge priority, both for, domestically and internationally for this administration. I think they see it as, an economic issue, as well as certainly, one that's a health issue, that's, one that's something that has to be addressed. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, and Secretary Kerry mentioned today, when you have $16 billion in damage from climate-related disasters, this is something that's really affecting the country in a lot of different ways. But I do think it's going to be an open conversation, and it's going to have to be looked at globally. I think the fact that you have somebody like John Kerry who has such experience in this issue area, yet also served as Secretary of State, is probably the best combination, because he also understands alliances. He understands on the global stage how this is important. And so I think doors will be open for that.
Alex, I commend you and anyone else listening. I'll just do a shameless plug here for my own paper. I commend you all to look at my front page today on this topic of rare earth metals and critical minerals more generally, how Australian companies are very, very active in America in providing those really important basic materials for things like the battery revolution that's bearing down on us. Without secure access to things like lithium, Elon Musk's not going to build all those cars that he says he will. Talk to the opportunities, do you think, Alex, that this sort of shift that we've seen provides for Australia?
Yeah, Jacob, I think one of the worst kept secrets from the climate movement is that in order to create a lot of these technologies, whether it's batteries, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's the guts of the wind turbines, that's going to require rare earth metals. And I think that's why we've seen the Biden administration talk about the need to securitize supply lines. And Australia 100% will be a part of that, because when you look back to 2018, President Trump signed actually a memorandum of understanding, a joint agreement with then Prime Minister Turnbull to securitize rare earth mineral resources between the two countries. But you're right, Australian companies are doing a fantastic job right now. We just recently saw Lynas was awarded a grant from the U.S. federal government in order to create one of the first rare earth separation facilities in Texas. On top of that, Rio Tinto and BHP and Fortescue and other companies are very integrated into the defense supply chain. So I think you're going to continue to see that be a major issue, especially as it relates to clean energy. Not only do those rare earth minerals go into F-35s and all sorts of heavy mechanic vehicles, but they also go into those clean energy technologies. So the problem here is that at present, China has about 90% of the world's rare earth reserves. So we are attempting to identify additional ways. We saw it with another mine that was reopened in California called Mountain Pass, but we see it throughout Australia, and specifically Western Australia.
Let's shift to the domestic priorities. Amy, you kicked off this session by telling us about just the incredible number of issues that he's facing, the new administration, and I think it's fair to say that shift in mood was pretty marked last week. I think we saw, notwithstanding what happened on January 6th, I think we saw last week with the inauguration the things that make us exalted when we look at America. That was the best of what your country has to offer. But now it's down to tin tacks, isn't it? Now he's got to deliver, because otherwise it all changes in 2 years again. How does this administration focus so that it has something to show in 2 years, when I presume the Republicans will come at them just as strong?
Yeah, I think that there was definitely a strategy, early on, Jacob, using these executive orders to send a signal. They were on various topics. They were on coronavirus, economy, the environment, equity, immigration, census, ethics, regulation. So they didn't focus on just one thing. Some of those uses of the executive order were to unwind some of what the Trump administration had done and send a clear signal that these are just topics that are of importance. So I think that was really one of the tactics early on. But I also think what's really important is that this, stimulus, the 1.9 trillion, relief that we've been talking about, this has to be the top priority, not only because, we still see in our electorate a divided country, people hurting, what's going to help send a signal that the Biden administration practices what it preaches. And it said that there's people hurting and that this administration was going to find relief. That can happen in a couple of ways. I mean, I think there's still this focus on going through a unity, trying to get Republicans on board to pass this comprehensive bill to move forward. At the same time, they're running another track, that's the budget reconciliation front, which doesn't need that, supermajority in the Senate. could pass some parts of that plan. I think the goal is to try and get to the full package, but those two tracks are running at the same time. I think the other thing that's really important when you look at the priorities are, we have to get a vaccination plan in place that's actually working for the American people. I think that that's one of the top priorities, and trying to evaluate what was actually done during the Trump administration and what has to happen now so that people can get back to work. A big issue now in the States is so that, you know, students can get back to school, teachers can get in the classroom. So the big thing with all these issues is also the timing. I don't think they can afford to have any one of these issues take a long period of time. They really need to have some early wins. This can't drag out for longer than 6 months. So I think they're being very tactic wise, looking at, you know, how to get this comprehensive, you know, plan passed, how to get a health plan, you know, in place to make sure Americans are vaccinated, building up that political capital then to move forward and take on some of these, you know, tough issues, not only ones that traditionally Democrats, you know, have cared about, and some of the more progressive wing, you know, of the party, but some of the other things that they promised throughout. Some vehicles could be an infrastructure package, you know, others that could bring people to the table. But I think these first moves in the first 6 months will matter a lot to see what they can accomplish throughout.
As you say, Amy, it's an incredible burning platform, and a lot of that focus has to go into addressing those immediate issues around the pandemic and the vaccine rollout. In a sense, though, that just gets you back to the baseline, doesn't it, of where America was a year ago. And you still have all these other underlying problems and issues that Democrats particularly want to see addressed. It's a huge list. They want electoral reform. They want infrastructure. They would like to see a lift in the minimum wage. They've promised a lot of things. How do they do that, Alex? How do they prioritize? And what's your pick, do you think, in terms of the nitty gritty of where they go?
Well, I have to agree with Amy. Out of the gate, we got to get the stimulus package done. 84% of the American public wants to see additional stimulus lobbed on top of what has already been done. And yes, there are deficit concerns, but you know, we need to address those down the track. 71% of the American public believes that Democrats and Republicans should work together. That's easier said than done. And you know, this really has echoes of 2009. You know, when it took 6-8 months to actually get a stimulus package together once Obama took office, because you were horse trading with a bunch of Republicans. And eventually, once that thing did get lifted off, it was watered down so much and it was so late that the recovery period took so long. Moving forward through, so I think the stimulus package is going to be done via budget reconciliation that requires 50+1. Kamala Harris being that one vote in the Senate. But I think down the track, you have 1 or 2 shots in the locker. And I think those 2 shots in the locker are going to be infrastructure first, because that does have stimulus components to it. On top of that, you can also address climate concerns. You can also address equity concerns. You can also address things like rural broadband. So reaching across different constituencies and hopefully satisfying different groups of folks. And then secondly, I think Biden's immigration plan will ultimately be the bipartisan plan that America really wants to see. He's going to lean into it, and he's already stated that he doesn't need to have his entire package done, but it has things across the board, whether it's you know, pathway to citizenship for immigrants that are already here, that are here illegally, or whether it is supporting, you know, Northern Triangle countries with about $4 billion. So I think that one's going to be the one where we see a significant amount of horse trading and deals, and eventually getting something across the line. But let me just reiterate, stimulus has to get done, because if it doesn't get done, there are going to be serious political ramifications during the midterms and during 2024. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of Republicans announce their retirement in recent months, is because they see, at least in the Senate, because they see where they've read the tea leaves and they see where this is going. And it doesn't look like I think they've made the calculation that they're not going to be in the majority for the next few years.
That sense that the clock's really ticking, I think we felt that in the last sort of 2 days when this debate around the filibuster was resolved, or not resolved, I guess, depending on your point of view. tell me, how's that going to affect the way things get done? And Biden's obviously got a reputation for being a great deal maker in the Senate. But I think there's a lot of Democrats who would have liked to have seen that filibuster done away with once and for all. Yet here we are with it still lingering. Maybe Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that
there's
there's definitely, you know, a pressure on Biden to not just, I mean, we won, you know, the Democrats won. And so the fact that they control the House, they control the Senate, there's this opportunity. And I think Democrats will kind of push the administration to try to be bold on some of these things. I think the other thing that's really important is, you know, we talked a little bit about, there was other, you know, things that led to his ability to govern in a way, and that is control of the Senate. You know, those two Senate races in Georgia cost $500 million. And so what was that to do? It was to be able to control the calendar in the Senate. And so what I think you'll also see is that in some ways the administration might be pushed. You'll see a Nancy Pelosi, you'll see a Chuck Schumer be able to bring a lot of these issues to the floor and force a vote on some of them to get things, you know, moving. And so that'll be a big question too, how those two chambers, as Alex rightly pointed out, we're always in an election mode, you know, in the United States. And so what will they do to kind of force some of these issues and bring them to the floor and force some of these, you know, members to vote on that? So I think that'll be really important as well. But I think there's an interest for trying to find unity where you can, but if you're not going to get it, trying to find those pathways to try and move the agenda forward.
One of the new senators, of course, from Georgia, that's important to mention, the strong Australian connection that he has, John Ossoff. And one of the questions we got from the people on this call was, how does his win and that shift in who controls the Senate affect US-Australia relations? I don't know. Is there a link there, do you think, Alex?
It's a stretch, but hopefully he can become a member of the Friends of Australia caucus that was revived a few years ago. Yeah, his mother was an Australian, interestingly enough, and he held citizenship in Australia for a long time. So he seems like he's going to probably be a pretty strong ally for Australia in the U.S. Senate. But I also want to mention Raphael Warnock. He and Senator Ossoff were the two that really delivered the majority. And as Amy mentioned, now Schumer is going to be able to bring some votes to the floor that, you know, a lot of vulnerable Republicans aren't going to want to vote on.
Yeah. And because you brought up Warnock, I think it's really important to mention that he's right away up for re-election because that was to fill a seat. So it'll be very interesting how Senator Ossoff looks at this. You know, in some ways they were elected together. It's like Georgia's senators, you know, in one package. And so as we're taking votes, he's automatically repivoting and is going to run again in 2 years. So that's going to make things challenging, you know, in the state. And I think both senators are going to, you know, it'll be interesting to see the way they vote on a lot of these things.
I was going to ask, both of those senators, as well as all the others in that chamber now, have this. We haven't mentioned it at all, but it's hanging over everything. This impeachment trial that will start very soon. How does that affect the Biden administration and all these things we're talking about? All the things they want to get done, the coalitions they have to build with people from the other side, and they've even got to keep people like Joe Manchin, senators who tend to come from very conservative states on side as well. How does Biden and how do the Democrats manage this? Because it looks like it has spikes on it for all sides from where I sit.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in there, and Amy, I'll turn over to you. But first of all, on impeachment, President Trump is not going to be convicted in the Senate. It's not going to happen. I just don't see how the numbers are possible. In the House, 10 Republicans voted for impeachment, and those 10 Republicans are all now receiving primary battles. They're having members of Congress that are closely aligned with President Trump, like Matt Gaetz, fly into their home districts and start rallying support for a primary battle. So only about 4% or 5% of House Republicans voted for impeachment. I just don't see how it's going to be possible to get the equivalent of 34%, which is 17 Republican senators, to vote for impeachment, especially in light of Rand Paul's vote that he forced onto the floor yesterday, where 45 Republicans indicated that the entire impeachment trial, because President Trump has now left office, is unconstitutional. So you may get 4 or 5 senators that do vote for it, but he is not going to be convicted. But you're right, there is a bigger issue, which is the calendar. President Biden has pushed Senator Schumer to walk and chew gum at the same time, push through the nominees for cabinet, begin debating some sort of legislation around the $1.9 trillion package, as well as other initiatives that they're going to push. But it's going to be difficult. If they don't, I think ultimately pushing the impeachment trial out by a couple of weeks was probably a good thing, so that they could get a few legislative wins under their belt, even if they were confirmations. But it's definitely going to muddy the waters in relation to the $1.9 trillion package.
Yeah, and
Amy, as Alex says, he doesn't think this will get through.
No, I thank you for asking that, Jacob, because I do think that, Alex and I are certainly in agreement on this. When you see only 5 Republican senators say there's even validity in bringing this, to the chamber, this is not, there's not enough Romney Republicans really to try and kind of move this forward. But I do think that what's important is that this has to happen. There has to be accountability. I think that there is definitely, it needs to be shown the American people that, impeachment exists for a reason. The 25th Amendment exists for a reason, that I think you see time and time again, elected officials saying, like, there has to be consequences. On January 6th, this mob came into the Capitol. There was a Capitol police officer that was bludgeoned to death. To not have some kind of accountability for this would not be okay. And I do think what you've seen now is you've seen Senator Kaine bring up possible censure, and trying to see if he could get support for that, so that there is some kind of penalty, for what happened, and that there's a clear message going on. And I think Senator Kaine said he'd bring that certainly to the chamber if he could get enough Republican support, and there might be a way to do that. But I agree with him, it's not going to happen. I think timing is important, and I think the big question is, talks more about what is the future of the Republican Party in this country. And as they struggle to find out who is, the leadership here, the actions of Mitch McConnell, who is now leading from behind. He doesn't control the Senate calendar. He doesn't get to decide what issues are coming, to the forefront in the Senate. I think it's really, challenging, but I think this is something that we have to discuss. It has to happen. But I agree with Alex, the possibility that we're going to see the trial, and I don't think it'll be elongated. I think Senator Schumer will try and keep it succinct. But again, some people are arguing, why give a platform yet again to, former President Trump?
Right, and are Democrats simply creating a martyr here for Trump, or for anyone else who runs with the Trump name? And I gather there'll be a few in some of these Senate races around the country in the years to come. You're just giving them a big platform to, to air the grievance yet again.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions here, and I think we're getting towards the sort of 45-minute mark. Maybe, Amy, Alex, we could do a couple of quick-fire ones. These are questions from viewers. The ones that interest me, let me see. Do we think the Trans-Pacific Partnership will resume in its original form or some other form? Of course, there is a Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's been renamed. It exists. It's missing one particular large Pacific member. What do you guys think? Is that realistic with Biden, who is obviously very aware of being accused of being anti-America first?
Yeah, I'll just chime in real quick. I think it will happen. I think it's going to be a few years. It's low on the priority list at the moment because America still has, most of America, and including the working class base of the Democratic Party, has a pretty negative view of trade agreements as a whole. So it's going to take not only convincing them, but also lobbying both GOP and Democratic members of Congress to pass TPA, so that, once again, because I believe it's lapsed, so that they can have a full vote on it. It will happen. It's just not going to happen in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I agree with, when you're looking for those things to get through and to make an impact early on, this would be a hard one to use, the relationships, the political capital on.
I think we've seen a lot of reporting over the years about the state of morale in the State Department, for instance. The shift to Trump and Pompeo was obviously not welcomed by many in the diplomatic service. Question here, how long will it take to put the State Department, and they also add here, Department of Immigration back together in America?
Well, I think it's, you see
Whoever has the
their
strongest view
indication,
on that.
they've started from the top already. And I think seeing some of the, you know, nominations pass through is really important. I think there's a commitment right away to get to work. I do think you saw Secretary Blinken say today he is reaching out certainly to you know, the non-political appointees and making sure they're heard and what challenges they had faced, you know, over the years. I do think you also see presidential personnel trying as fast as they can to get people in these positions. I think you saw with the Trump administration definitely more of a likelihood to leave things, you know, open and not have the staff that's necessary. I think in good faith, you do see Secretary Blinken having an internal look to see, you know, where the challenges were and how to do this. But I think he knows well that building. I think he knows what it's going to take. And I think it's the top priority. It'll take some time as all things to kind of move, but I think they know that that has to happen in order for them to be successful and all the important work they need to do.
Alex?
I completely agree. I mean, I think the Biden administration has, you know, seen the political appointees that they have brought in as a return to the technocrats, the subject matter experts, and I think that alone should be a shot across the bow that we're going to rebuild the public service.
And maybe one last question, again from our audience. When and who might the new ambassador to Canberra be from Washington? Any of you care to speculate? Both of you are well placed, well sourced. It's just between you and me. No one else is listening.
Well, I'm voting for Alex. I don't know what's going to happen. So I think it'll be soon. I think it'll be, you know, in the next, you know, several months. I see it being a priority. I don't have, you know, an idea who might be best, but I think my only thing that I would weigh in is that you see very smart decisions being made, not just people who they'd like to put in positions, but people who have experience and will do a good job. They take these roles very seriously. But if it's not Alex, I don't know. So.
Well, there's a really good ambassador, and his last name's Barry. No, I think we're going to see an ambassador in Canberra probably within the first 6 months of this year. It could potentially be someone with military experience that's been either at Indo-PACOM or at a previous post. Traditionally, it is a political appointee. But if they follow suit with the Obama administration, with Ambassador Bleish and Ambassador Barry, it's going to be someone who they trust can carry out and execute the U.S. foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific.
Amy, Alex, I think we've got to wrap it up there. I just sort of getting a measure on what we've been talking about. I think there's still so much more there that we could go on and explore. I think the strongest message I think both of you have delivered is that the pandemic will be the #1 priority for this administration. They have to get Americans back to work, the 10 million who've lost their jobs, as you pointed out, Alex. In terms of China, I think you called it the elephant in the room. It's that issue that will dominate foreign policy, as it has for the last 4 years. Australia has a massive interest in that. And as you point out, I think this is really critical. American foreign policy has to be foreign policy for the middle class. If it's not, it's politically poisonous. Both of you sound very bullish on the US-Australian relationship, which is good from my point of view. And I think the issues that we discussed around climate change will be one of those drivers of the relationship, because I think it's something where Australia can bring a lot to the table, rather than merely, hoping for things from America to come this way. And I think that's an important basis for the relationship. So can I just thank the American Australian Association for hosting us? I think it's been a terrific conversation. Amy, Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah.
Likewise, thank you, and look forward to hearing from you all as we go on. Take care.
Thank you.